Not too long ago, I was playing a game called Valkyrie Elysium. It's an action game, albeit one with an overly intricate upgrade system, I guess in an attempt to tie it a bit more to its franchise's RPG roots. Not a bad game, but a little bland for the most part, despite the fact that it includes almost all of the typical action game mechanics and features that have made other games in the genre shine. Timed dodges, last-second parries, attacks you can charge with enemy drops, grapple grabs. But it feels like they were included by way of a checklist. The implementation lacks the bite of other titles, plus there aren't any substantial new gimmicks to really spice things up. I had similar feelings towards Scarlet Nexus not too long ago. These are decent action games, but aren't really going far outside the box. I guess the worry is that for as much as this genre has seen a small resurgence lately, that it will stagnate if it just relies on these checklist mechanics, and doesn't innovate or create bold new takes on past formulas. DMC5 brought a lot of cool new ideas to the table and executed on them well. I wouldn't say it rested on its laurels at all, but a great deal of that game's appeal was seeing mechanical concepts born a few console generations ago translated into the present with insane modern production value. It felt like a swan song in a way for all the classic tropes that we had never seen in such a spectacular way before. In the wake of that, it seems like a good time to start really experimenting again. So I can understand why a game like Bayonetta 3 would want to try and mix things up with something like its giant demon battle mechanics, even though I thought the game was a miss for both its implementation of that and other things. The concept was a valiant effort, executed on the wrong hardware in perhaps the wrong franchise. Surprisingly, the latest company to bring a new spin to things is Tango with Hi-Fi Rush, a game manifested into reality out of nowhere about a young man whose robot arm prosthetic gets fused with his .wav player and has to fight the corporation responsible seeking to recall him.
Let's go!
And while it's not the next great leap in action gaming or anything, it definitely feels like the follow-up to a dream that's been brewing in I think all of our minds since Metal Gear Rising set the lyrics of the boss battle music to come in as the fight approached the climax, and was repercolated when DMC5 had its tracks grow in strength the better you played. And it's, what if an entire 3D action game was built around rhythm and music? And this game has a smart take on the idea. All the game's moves are tied to the beat of the music playing in the level, whether you time your button presses to the beat or not. But timing those presses makes your attacks land harder, triggers more colorful effects on screen, and of course contributes to the end level rank you can brag about. You're rewarded for syncing up, but you're not subjected to some discordant cacophony if you don't. The game feels and looks good to play, and then feels and looks even better if you're in time. That said, there are some fun, smart uses for this that wouldn't feel out of place in an action game without this gimmick. There's a delay between dodges, but you can chain 3 successive dodges if you time them on the beat. You're rewarded for paying attention with increased mobility. The player can toggle on a metronome to keep track of the beat, but the entire game world also hops and bops to that beat, giving you other ways to keep track of it, but also making the whole game world feel like an interactive music video you're playing through. Of course, this gimmick would be for nothing without good music, and the original score here is great, catchy and energetic, but it's the licensed tracks that hit hard, cause they almost seem hand-picked just for me. Nine Inch Nails, The Prodigy, The Joy Formidable are all bands I listen to, and I'm glad I'm not the only one who has thought they would complement an action game perfectly. I've been waiting for an action game with The Prodigy in it for a long time. Wish someone else had had that idea. If anything, I was hoping for more licensed tracks. I get that sorting out the rights is probably a nightmare, but you get a shorter list than I would have expected here. Don't go into this expecting Guitar Hero the action game. That said, the ones they picked and where they're used is perfect, elevating the moment. But how are the underlying mechanics the music system is based on? Well, it's nothing you won't be used to if you're a fan of this type of game. Pause combos, launches, parries, grapple grabs, special meter that you save up for to execute a powerful move. It makes sense that the game doesn't try and mess with that basic formula too much in this case, since it wants your focus to be on learning this novel new timing system. It's also good that they've really nailed down some satisfying attack animations here, more so than some action titles I've played recently. I think for action game fans, the fun is going to be seeing these classic mechanics you're familiar with implemented for the rhythm gameplay, but also for action newcomers drawn in by the musical elements and aesthetic first. The timing system isn't bad at helping novices get to grips with those classic action game moves, like pause combos. I like how your moves have a bit of use outside of combat too, like how environmental hazards intended to be dodged can also be blocked if you're sick like that. While the main character with his robot arm and female tech geek sidekick may bring to mind DMC5, this game actually started production before that game, so there's quite a bit of DMC4 influence, like a boss fight that brings Sanctus to mind, as well as DMC Devil May Cry influence, like these little transitional shots between enemy waves and some eerily similar rooms. Although I don't know, maybe I'm just seeing things. One thing it has in common with that game though that I'm not keen on are enemies that require one certain move to be damaged. In this case, moves that are tied to cooldown timers. Uh-oh. A 2-for-1 on ideas I'm skeptical about. These cooldowns take the form of partner characters who jump in and do a move before popping out, which is a mechanic that's been appearing in action games a lot more lately, especially those that want to build a story around a group of characters, while focusing on combat with a single-player character. I would have liked to have seen these partner moves be one-to-one controlled by the player, like V in DMC5 or the Bayo 3 summons, rather than having them jump in and do their thing and leave. Firing individual shots with the gun summon or individual punches with the tank summon would make the player feel more involved in the execution of those moves. This implementation perhaps could mean foregoing them needing cooldowns, if their strength was also nerfed a little bit, having them function more as weapons and less like non-core special moves, more like extra instruments you'd be adding to your track. You can also call these characters in for some awesome looking combo finishes, which require an added chunk of special meter to do. Special meter which you can earn by fighting, which even if it takes longer, always feels more rewarding than waiting for a timer to cool down. I think those moves requiring special meter is enough of a cost, rather than meter plus checking the character used in question has cooled off, which in my ideal dream revised implementation wouldn't be a thing for any move. This all said, the cooldowns don't become as big an issue as they do in some action games, since they do cool down pretty fast, and of course I turned on the perks that make them boot up again even faster. It's just I think any opportunity to not include them should be one taken. Your mileage may vary with the lack of any lock-on control here. I played through the game without it being a huge problem, but still ran into the odd occasion where it undermined me, like sending my attack or grapple towards a shielded foe. For a game so much about timing and less so about positioning, it could have been worse. But I think at least the ability to hold a button to keep a single enemy tracked would have been a worthwhile feature. At the end of the day, regardless of the amount of moves and combo possibilities, is performing to a high level both rewarding and satisfying in this title? I'd say it is quite a bit, especially for a first stab at this musical take on things. It's hard not to call it a success. Unlike something like DMC5, which wanted to make a cutting-edge looking action game, Hi-Fi takes the opposite approach, going deliberately for a charming retro look. It feels like a mixture of styles and influences that calls back to mid-2000s animation, when Western cartoons started incorporating anime influences, and sometimes had segments animated in 2D and 3D respectively. Galactic Football, anybody? Oh, you were thinking of Code Lyoko? Oh, sorry. And this is an appropriate look, given that we're dealing with a title mechanically styled after that era too. But not just in terms of combat. The 2000s played host to a lot of 3D platforming, and this game feels like it's paying homage to that too, with a lot of work put into these guardrail-lacking environments. Hidden trinkets, collectibles, and Easter eggs are everywhere. Different NPCs reappear throughout the levels, and you even get a few follow-ups from stage to stage on how these incidental characters are doing. It makes poking around a lot of fun, whether to find a new piece of kit or simply a gag. That said, I'm still not sold on the concept of picking up forms to read in games with such snappy, action-packed gameplay. Notes and memos are a better fit in slower-paced, more ambient games, I think. As funny as some of these docs are, there's just too much of a pull to get back to the frantic action here for me to fully enjoy reading them. But I guess you could argue they do no harm lying around here, giving some extra context if you want it. I also think the first half of the game is a little too lacking in combat, funnily enough. Battles feel a bit few and far between to begin with. I also think the title does sag a little bit in the middle. The start is very energetic, but halfway in you spend a lot of time underground or in enclosed environments with less dramatic musical set pieces. While not bad, the first and last third are a lot more exciting. I suppose you could say it's well paced in a sense, since it rises back up for an exciting final stretch at just the right time to make the last chunk extra exciting. The story is a pretty light-hearted romp through this evil company's ridiculous headquarters, manned by overworked droids, the walls plastered with ironic corporate propaganda. Our main cast, of course, are a rambunctious bunch of rule breakers, bumbling their way through the company's carefully constructed lair, complete with offices, labs, exhibits, attractions, cafeterias, and more still under construction. You play as the biggest bumbler of them all, Chai, a wannabe rock star with a penchant for reckless plans. I don't think there's any way to make a game that's trying to be funny that doesn't get a mixed reaction. I personally thought most of it was pretty funny. The game throws constant gags at you, so of course some of them were kind of groaners. I think a character rolling their eyes at another for making a pun is a little played out by now. But the game also made me laugh out loud a few times, and it's rare for a game to do that. At first I thought this Twin Peaks gag was a little too on the nose, but then when it hard cut to the cat dancing, it became so on the nose it made me bust out a chuckle. My favorite gags came from your robot companion Cinnamon though, who has to draw his own emotions on his deadpan face, which I never got tired of for some reason. Even some of the cheesier jokes are saved by good comic timing, and not lingering too much on the punchline.
Oh, this is crazy! Looks like we found our AI.
This is a screensaver, Jai.
Peppermint and Macron round out the rest of the team nicely, the girl who rolls her eyes at you and the dependable, gentle giant bro. A real fantasy setting for me, representing the opposite of my real-life social experience, of course. You know, women who think I'm dreamy and a bunch of dudes sweating to one-up me. It's hard out there for a true gangster, my friends. Anyway, back to my game review. I will say the character designs aren't entirely my cup of tea. If I was in charge, there'd be a lot more combat boots and leather jackets. They seem more aimed at a younger audience than at me. But what is fun about this game is definitely that it's appropriate for a younger audience, while also being cleverly written and snappy enough for older gamers too, with plenty of homages to stuff the younger crowd probably won't get. If I'm being honest, this probably would have been my favorite game ever at 11, so take that for what you will. The game's world is very exaggerated and cartoony, with very ill-defined rules, of course. Because of that, it's hard to say the game entirely earns its more profound set pieces, but to be honest, they're executed so well, it's hard to not get wrapped up in them anyway. And afterwards, there's usually a gag to relieve the tension. Some of the mixture of influence, though, does seem a bit haphazard here and there. There's Scott Pilgrim influence here that of course comes out in some of the attitude and style, but that's also probably why the bosses get taken out with a blunt object and then explode or something, which to me felt kind of out of place with the tone of the rest of the game, where you just bash robots about. I don't know, maybe the bosses are okay, off screen or something. What's always fun to see from a comedy game is the use of gaming as a medium itself used to tell the joke. There's so much hidden dialogue in this game. Quit out of a mission and the characters will throw up excuses as to how they're back at the hideout halfway through an operation. This is the kind of stuff that really endears me to a game, because you can tell the developers really had to care about it to include such small missable details like this. You can feel the love pouring out of this one, and with extra difficulty modes and unlockables, secrets and ranks to go back to and get. Hey, I can even get the leather jacket I wanted. At a budget price, this is a ride well worth going on for action fans, or just fans of the 2000s, I guess. The hardest difficulty auto game overs you if you don't play on the beat well enough. Perfect for rhythm game fans who might find themselves just too good at this one. Tango has really shocked us all with this game, because I'm probably not the only one who was a bit disappointed with Ghostwire and the direction that it took. A game that had the typical years-long hype cycle with a giant open world and more lifelike graphics. There's no doubt impressive elements to Ghostwire in the detail of the environments and some of the visual set pieces, but the core gameplay was a bit bland, and the by-the-numbers open world structure and progression not very exciting. My impression with Ghostwire was that it was a game with greater intentions that were perhaps too broadly spread across this big open Tokyo sandbox to be fully realized, while something like Hi-Fi and its 9-hour linear campaign gets to be more focused, dense with detail, but allowed to really experiment with deeper and wilder core gameplay. I'd love if every game was announced and released on the same day like this one. Now, I'm not saying that's the best way for every game to make money. I'm just saying in my dream world, a game popping into existence overnight, instead of dragging out expectations for years, is the way I'd want it to be. Hi-Fi is a really fun spin on the action formula we're used to, but it's, keep in mind, still that. A brilliant cover of a song you've played before that breathes new life into it, but nevertheless has the same lyrics. It's tricky for developers, because in the past we've seen truly daring twists on the action game like Wonderful 101 or God Hand, that failed to capture a big audience and in turn didn't see their styles built upon. The only thing we've seemed to have taken from God Hand is its camera angle, which is probably its most questionable feature. Maybe for those games it was all a little too much, too fast, and Hi-Fi has struck a good balance between new and old here. Perhaps now, through iteration with an established audience, it could build itself up into something that really stands apart from the Devil May Cry's and Ninja Gaidens. It's really cool, but like many action games we've seen before, I see even more potential. Well, until they do a follow-up for this, if Shinji Mikami is going to produce another game at Tango, we know what we want. Dan Killian in Power Slide Shooter 2. I mean 1.